I'm very pleased this evening to introduce Arianna Huffington. Arianna Huffington has been a major presence in media, journalism, and politics for many years. Though for the early part of her career, she aligned with conservative American politics, including her support of Bob Dole's 1996 presidential run, she is now known as a stalwart of the Democratic Party. Most notably, she is co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post, an outlet for blogging and commentary by liberal journalists and public figures on all aspects of politics and culture. She is also, among many other projects, co-host of the syndicated radio program Left, Right, and Center, and has written numerous books on subjects ranging from politics to spirituality to biography. Her new book, Third World America, examines how the actions of politicians, lobbyists, and bankers have created economic fault lines through American society, and moreover, how those fault lines are affecting not only our political and economic systems, but also our education, infrastructure, and standing within the global arena. This evening's discussion will be moderated by Chris Lydon. Chris is the host of open source, an internet and public radio-based program focusing on the arts, humanities, and global affairs, which has been run in partnership with Brown University's Watson Institute since 2007.
Buy this book, that's the point. Good evening. Arianna Huffington and I are, I think, continuing a conversation. It began in 1988 with one of her first books about Picasso. We talked about it on WBUR television, and it's a pleasure to be continuing it. My first question is for the audience. I just want to throw it out there. How many people here would have paid $5 and filled the Brattle Theater to hear the publisher of the New York Times talk about his book? How about the president of CBS, whoever that is? NBC, ABC. Okay, we'll come back to that theme.
That's not fair. It depends on the book. They could have written a good book.
Well, that's the sort of question. We have a book here that I know Arianna Huffington wants to talk about, but we have a person. I have a sort of feeling that people are here to, she's too modest to even admit this, but that may be more interested in her even than in the book. But first of all, sell that book.
Hi. First of all, it's great to be with you.
Pleasure.
I always love talking with you.
I just do.
And I love it when you write and you put it on the Huffington Post.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. This is my publisher, after all.
You should do that more often. And also, I love this theater. I've never been here before, and it's just beautiful and sort of redolent of history. And it doesn't exactly feel like Third World America, but kind of could be, right? So just very quickly, I had made a promise to my family and everybody who cared for me after my 12th book that I would never write another book. And then my agent called me and said, Roger Scholl from Random House has been reading what you've been writing about the middle class being under assault, crumbling, and wants you to write a book about that. And to cut a long story short, I decided, because I care so much about this topic, that I would write the book, but I did not tell anybody because I did not want them to stage an intervention. So this was the first time in my life when I wrote a book in secret. Have you ever tried to do that? I highly recommend it. It makes you feel very naughty. And so one of the reasons I chose this title is because my favorite heroine in Greek mythology is Cassandra. You know, Cassandra told the Trojans, you may remember, not to let the Trojan horse in. And they didn't believe her. And they turned out to be very wrong and very dead. So the idea here is to sound the alarm, to say that we are in this trajectory, that we have still the time to turn around, but if we don't course correct, basically the middle class is crumbling. Instead of upward mobility, we have downward mobility. The polls that came out last week showed that 2/3 of the American people now believe that their children are not going to do as well as they're doing. I'm sure you all know kids graduating from college who can't get jobs, people in their 40s and 50s losing jobs who are not getting rehired. Our infrastructure is crumbling, as we've seen with the natural gas lines and the disaster in California. And we have a window, but we don't have the sense of urgency. Remember, Chris, when Wall Street was threatened, everybody came together, all the political establishments, and effectively said we can't afford to have the financial system collapse. We don't exactly know how we're going to save it, but we must throw everything against the wall and save it. So I want to have the same sense of urgency about the middle class, about jobs, about foreclosure, say we don't have all the answers. There are multiple ways to do it, but we need to do everything because we can't afford to have 26 million people out of work or underemployed and millions of people losing their homes.
Very quickly, who's the villain in the piece?
The villain is here. How our politicians are abandoning the middle class and betraying the American dream.
That's too many. That's too many.
Too many villains. No, the villains are those who basically allowed themselves to be bought. Like in a banana republic, the special interests are buying public policy. We had 3 examples. Recently, we had the Wall Street collapse, we had BP, and we had the mining disaster. They were all examples of a broken system. A system where regulations don't work anymore. Remember, there were regulators at the mine the day it collapsed. There's what is known as regulatory capture. There were
I was just going to say, it sounds like Simon Johnson and state capture.
State capture,
yeah.
Exactly. You had with BP the same thing. Remember, after the last mining collapse in 2006, we passed new legislation, but nobody paid attention to the loopholes. Loopholes are like yeast. You can't pass a bill without loopholes in the same way that you can't bake bread without yeast. So all these loopholes made it possible for Massey Energy to keep violating safety rules but not be closed down.
Okay, I'm just looking for a name or a handful of names or a few people. Those giant trends you're writing about don't just happen. There are people steering the boat in that direction. We thought we changed course in the Obama election, but who's to hold responsible, and then what's to do?
That's a very good point. We did think we changed course. But what I'm saying in the book is that we thought Hope was going to do it, and we would elect Obama, and then we could sit back, watch television, or read the Huffington Post.
Hope was Clinton. Change was Obama, right?
Well, hope and change. It was, as Sarah Palin puts it, how is that hoppy-changey thing going? And I'm saying that it's now about Hope 2.0. And Hope 2.0 is about what are we doing? That we can't just look to the knight on the white charger to come and save us. We have to grow up and realize that democracy is not a spectator sport. So we really need to sort of look in the mirror and discover the leader in the mirror, our own leadership potential. And that's why I end up on an optimistic note, because I believe if we do that, you and I were talking backstage about Edmund Burke's Little Platoons. He talked about how do you come together in communities and rebuild communities, rebuild families, and at the same time keep being involved in movement building, in citizen action to affect what politicians are doing.
Okay, well, you mentioned a magic name, Edmund Burke, English statesman, flourished at the end of the 18th century, contemporary of Dr. Johnson and all these people. But to me, I just rediscovered Burke. Edmund Burke was William F. Buckley's great hero through the Cold War, and including the platoon stuff, which meant local government, all businesses local, and that sort of thing. We're answerable to our neighbors and our families, basically, no radical change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Edmund Burke's really historic distinction to me was that he impeached, or he tried for years in Parliament to impeach Warren Hastings, who'd been the head of the East India Company in India, and responsible for every kind of betrayal of human rights. And Edmund Burke didn't succeed in impeaching him, but he succeeded in making Warren Hastings an evil name in human history, which indeed he was. To me, I keep asking myself this question. Where is our Edmund Burke? Where is somebody to impeach the Rumsfelds, the George W. Bushes, the Cheneys, and maybe even the Larry Summerses and the Robert Rubins who seem to have taken over the Obama administration? That's what I'm talking about. And you mentioned Burke. I didn't realize we were on the same fan page of Edmund Burke. But Edmund Burke is, to me, the missing voice in America today. And he talked about empire. He believed in empire, but he also believed in responsible empire. Empire that cared as much for Indian people and Indian prosperity and Indian welfare as they cared about English. He said it was betrayal of English rights and responsibilities that English power had so abused Indian rights. Okay.
Well, right now, you see, I think that America, in many ways, is acting like a declining empire. If you look at Afghanistan, for example, only a declining empire with a perverse sense of priorities would be spending hundreds of billions of dollars conducting a war which is unwinnable, which is not in our national security interest. Even Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA, admits that there are fewer than 100 al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan, and where we are basically propping up a corrupt regime. I mean, these are like military adventures that we cannot afford, and that in no way are they in our interest. So that is like fascinating. You know, I quote Arnold Toynbee in the book, who said that empires more often die because they commit suicide rather than from murder. Mm-hmm. And you imagine what would happen if that $2 billion a week that we're spending in Afghanistan was brought here at home to help rebuild the country and get jobs for people and rebuild our infrastructure. And you know what is so interesting? This is beyond left and right. There are many conservatives who think that. And as you said, Burke was a conservative. I was on Morning Joe the other day, and Joe Scarborough was saying that. And Tony Blankley is saying that. And George Will is saying that. And
Pat Buchanan says it in rougher language, but he says the same thing.
Yes, and Pat Buchanan is saying that. So the media are obsessed with seeing everything as a right-left issue, because you know what that makes them do? It can make them be the ones who are in the center. They're the wise ones, right? You have the extremists on the right and the extremists on the left, and they're sort of splitting the difference. But the truth is that the truth is often to be found on one side or the other. It's not like Pontius Pilate, what is truth? I don't know, let's split the difference.
And the thought popped right out of my head. Well, connect the two. Marines at $1 million a year per copy in Afghanistan, and the erosion of the middle class at home. Not to mention the disinvestment in public arts, public schools, public infrastructure, et cetera. I mean, should we think of the third world America in imperial terms?
Well, I think we need to think of the third world America in terms of what's happening around us. You know, I traveled around the country, and if you go through Detroit, or you go through Nevada, or you go through Racine, Wisconsin, you're just stunned by what is happening, by the boarded up houses, by the foreclosure notices, by the numbers of people out of work. And we're doing something unusual on the Huffington Post. We've created a new section called Third World America. Mm-hmm. And on that section, we have invited people to share their stories. And it's kind of amazing. You know, people are sharing incredible stories of struggle and of overcoming obstacles. And we are crowdsourcing my book too. So we ask people to send submissions. If you have any ideas, you can send them, of where I should go next. And you won't believe the sort of amazing things that are happening around the country. You know, there were this group from Racine, Wisconsin, for example, that sent me an invitation to go there, and they have 50% unemployment in urban areas there. They have unprecedented infant mortality rates. You know, all that is going on in this country. And what is also ironic is that a lot of the solutions that were discovered out of necessity in the third world, like microcredit, are now being brought to this country. It's like the irony is that Washington seems to be oblivious. The president sort of finally woke up last week and acknowledged that we are not in the recovery summer. Remember, that was their term. We are going through a recovery summer. And finally, they acknowledged after unemployment went up, GDP had to be recalculated downward. The Census Bureau announced that they were going to be reporting this week that poverty is now up to 15%, which takes us to the 60s. When we launched the war on poverty, that's the level we're back at. And you mentioned Larry Summers and Rob Rubin. There's no question that the fundamental problem the Obama White House did was to appoint people whose view of the world was so Wall Street-centric to run economic policy. It was a little bit like having people, pre-Galilean people, who believed that everything revolved around the Earth, produce navigation maps. It wasn't going to work, right? The ships were going to sink.
I want to ask you a media question, and I know we don't want to dwell too much on media, but to me it's important that you embody for all of us kind of the transformation. You've been called the most powerful blogger in the world. People are here to hear you who wouldn't believe the New York Times in a certain way. But who are we going to believe to tell us this story? Who's going to confirm in a kind of fundamental American narrative that we are at the gravest risk of being in a kind of terminal imperial moment?
Well, it's not a who. You see, that is really what is different. That's actually a very important question, because what is different is that we're not waiting for some Walter Cronkite voice to tell us this is how it is. And this is what is new and what is exciting. We all have to tell the story. We all have to tell the story of our time. And people are saying it online. So our job is to sort of collect these thousands of stories and create a mosaic. We have created 2 maps on HuffPost at the moment. One is a map where we put signs. When people come up with a story of struggle or a story of success, we put signs of where in America these stories are coming from. So you can go then, you can click and read that story, or watch the video, or see the pictures. And that's the way we're communicating with each other. You can go online now and see kind of amazing things. The unemployed are self-organizing, including to give back. I mean, there's these amazing out-of-work lawyers, accountants, in Philadelphia it started, who are coming together to help people stay in their homes, to help them avoid foreclosure. Just think of it. If you're out of work, it's so easy to get depressed. So the one thing, the one way to prevent depression and despair is action. And if you are helping someone, suddenly you are transformed from being a victim to being a helper.
Yeah, but may I say, I do want Walter Cronkite, in a way, to announce this, or the gods of my youth, Walter Lippmann and James Reston and page 1 of the New York Times, to confirm, in a certain sense, what we all know, but in isolation. And I'm still looking, this may be a bad habit, but I'm still looking for a figure that's vaguely authoritative, that's in touch with the historical narrative, kind of broader base than one, who also can write it in commanding prose, not just tell a story on a video screen, but to assemble, to change the overall narrative. The overall narrative that people say is going to prevail in the elections this fall is that we're taxed too much, that the government takes our money and throws it away, or something, or that Obama's a Muslim, or that some guy in Georgia or in the South wants to burn the Koran. We are awash in these basically idiotic narratives that are fundamentally out of touch. I'm looking, in a certain sense, for the principal of the school to say, listen up. It's not that we're overtaxed. It's that we are spending our money in the wrong places.
Chris, let
Okay.
me hold your hand for a minute.
I'll
This is
stop.
not going to happen. Okay, get over it. There isn't going to be a Walter Cronkite to tell us how it is.
There is one.
We have to grow
his
up.
name is Glenn Beck, and
No,
he's
but you
loony.
see, it's not. Like, that's the point. Glenn Beck and the Tea Party movement is responding to the incredible abuse of power by our establishments. Now, their response is potentially dangerous, but there is a lot of legitimate anger right now.
I agree.
I mean, if I were out of work, if I had lost everything, how would I feel? And I'm pretty angry, and I still have a job, but I'm pretty angry about the fact that we bailed out with taxpayer money the same people who wrecked our economy without any strings attached, without any conditions. I can understand that we had to bail them out, but I would have put stringent conditions, clawbacks for the people that they had basically stolen the money from in their own exotic ways. No bonuses, having to lend back to the community, ending too big to fail, all these things that didn't happen. So that anger, if you scratch the surface of whatever the Tea Partiers are saying, underneath it is this incredible anger at the bailout. So right now, there are going to be sort of two forces. It's going to be the Tea Party response, which very often becomes anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, basically scapegoating, which has been a response that we've seen throughout history. Mm-hmm. And then there can be a constructive response, which is, yes, the system is screwed up. We need to try and fix the system. While we're fixing it, we need to see what can we do in our own communities, with our own families, to turn things around. If we don't do that, we are basically ceding the future to the forces of anger that are really creating, as you said, these idiotic narratives to make sense of what has happened in their lives.
This is everybody's forum. Everybody gets the chance to speak in the new media in Huffington City. So be ready with a question. Oh, and we're almost there. I just want to mention another take on the same phenomenon that I read in Truthdig when I wasn't reading HuffPo this morning. It was a Chris Hedges piece that really kind of shook me, because it's almost what I believe, and a lot of it came from Ralph Nader. But the lead on the piece was that it's almost impossible to point at any big institution in this country now, including Congress and the unions and media even, and feel a kind of democratic voice, to know that there is a kind of venting of genuine, authentic experience. They're talking, and this again is Ralph, I've heard it from Chris Hedges too before, but that the problem is a kind of a corporate strangulation of almost everything. They bought everything now. And I wonder if you would go that far. Are they on the same page with you? I wonder if we don't, as they do, have to sort of name an enemy before we're going to beat it.
Well, first of all, I don't think they've bought everything. I think I have an entire section which is about amazing acts of resilience, creativity, compassion all around the country that would move you to tears. You know, that's why I spend so much time telling stories, because I agree with you. We can't just give people data. We got to tell stories, because the only thing that can save us ultimately is waking up our empathy. It's like, if we don't wake up the empathy gene, we all have the empathy gene. But for many years, it wasn't part of our survival, right? It was the survival of the fittest. Well, now it's going to be the survival of the wisest. And we can't be wise if we're not empathetic. Mm-hmm. So for me, there has to be like a psychological transformation that happens if we're going to come out of this preventing third world America and rebuilding our lives. And it has to happen at every level, starting with tapping into our own resilience. Because I've seen so many people who are just crushed. But once they act, I mean, I've had the most amazing emails from people who've done a very simple thing. We launched this campaign that I write about called Move Your Money.
Yeah.
Which is, are you angry at the big banks? You know what? Move your money from the big banks. You know, you can put your zip code on moveyourmoney.info, and we've worked it out so that you can find out all the community banks and credit unions in your area that are credit worthy. Your money is guaranteed up to $250,000, no matter where you put it. And it's a small act of saying, you know, I have some control over my destiny. I can move that money. They're much more likely to reinvest in their communities. They're much less likely to impose all these hidden overdraft fees, et cetera, et cetera. So,
And how is that campaign?
2 million people have done it.
Amazing.
And what is now wonderful is that now it's moving to cities, states, pension funds, you know, institutions doing it.
Well, incidentally, talking about bailouts, Harvard recently received, the richest university in the world, $157 million stimulus money. So I think there's a room to be a little concerned about that too, as far as corporations getting it. But the American public in the last 30 or 40 years, particularly the middle class, has consumed larger houses as their families decreased in size, more expensive, sophisticated medical treatments, more and more larger cars. Does any of the blame lay at their own feet?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that many people have acted like addicts and have actually bought the idea that there is a kind of no down payment, no proof of income shortcut to the good life. But there were street corner drug peddlers peddling that, right? And in any other area of drug addiction, we punish the drug pushers more than we punish the drug addicts. You have a longer prison sentence, right? But here, the drug pushers are doing great. You know, they pushed all these mortgages, they pushed all these credit cards with the teaser interest rates. I don't know if any of you here are students, but you know, students are offered like these amazing interest rates. And of course, they don't read the small print because credit card contracts are now 29 and 30 pages. Who's going to read the small print? But in the small print is the fact that your credit card rates will suddenly go up to 29, 30%, you know, which are usury rates, right? So yes, absolutely, people have a personal responsibility. And that's why I believe, you know, in that Chinese ideogram of crisis and opportunity, that as things are falling apart, we have an opportunity to reevaluate our lives and reprioritize what matters. So there is a lot of good that can come out of this.
Yeah, it's another question about middle class, heal thyself. Heal thyself of our bad mental habits.
Yes, I mean, it's again another question of our own personal responsibility. What are we doing about the cars we drive, or what kind of action do we take to reduce our own footprint and all these things? And a lot of people are acting much more consciously. So we are asking basically about putting the spotlight on all the ways we can live more responsibly, eat better, you know, all these things. And there is a lot of that that's happening. And that's why I'm saying it depends on what you focus. You know, you can focus on what is dying. You can focus on what is being born. And really, I'm encouraging you to do both. You know, we have to focus on the acts of destruction and all that's happening that potentially can turn us into a third world America. We can't close our eyes to that. But we also need to focus and put the spotlight, and that's my commitment on the Huffington Post, to all the incredible acts of creativity, innovation, and empathy. Because by doing that, we're inspiring others to do the same. And it's almost like a muscle. The more we exercise it, the stronger it gets.
The question is, can unions help? Are they shrinking too fast to be relevant? Or what can they do, even at a shop level?
Oh, absolutely they can help. And Richard Trumka, that I presume you are talking about, is going around both speaking out and putting money in important races. And of course they can help. I think the ability of workers to organize has been instrumental in many of the advances we have seen. At the same time, unions need to acknowledge that, say, supporting teachers who are not able to provide the right education for children and protect them even when they are disadvantaging the children that desperately need the best teaching possible is not good for education. And there's a great documentary I write about in the book that's coming out later this month called Waiting for Superman by Davis Guggenheim, who directed An Inconvenient Truth. And it's really powerful because it will break your heart to see the children in the documentary that we follow from the beginning. Basically, by the end, having to wait to see if they can win the lottery to go to a better school. So basically the American dream, which is so based on education, has come down to a game of chance. That's very un-American. And that's really what I'm writing about. The fact that we can't just trust that simply by working hard, by doing everything that we are supposed to do, we are going to be able to advance in life.
Question being, who's going to pay for stopping, preventing Third World America in this anti-tax context? How do you explain the anti-tax context, incidentally?
Well, I think the lady who asked the question got it right, that a lot of the the latest version of the anti-tax movement has to do with the fact that our taxes were misused in bailing out the banks. I mean, this has been incredibly damaging because, there has been an anti-government fervor since the Reagan years. But this is the first time when people have real evidence that government was the problem. It took our money and gave it to Wall Street, and Wall Street turned around and did extremely well and did not return the favor by bailing out Main Street, by lending, by doing all the things that they should have done. So, and what is interesting is that this bailout was the product of Republicans and Democrats coming together with the financial elite, the shadow elite that made all these decisions, and that basically made them out of fear. Part of that was, remember that there was this atmosphere of fear that if we didn't do that, the world would collapse. Fear is an incredibly dangerous motivator, and we see that in the Tea Party movement because the minute sort of people become afraid, they operate from their lizard brains instead of their rational brains. And they can believe anything. They can believe that Obama is a Muslim, or that basically if we don't overturn the 12th Amendment, we're going to be in trouble, or if we allow the Islamic Community Center to be built near ground zero, this will be desecration. All those things can be believed in an atmosphere of fear.
Talk about, the pre-Galilean economists that are working for Obama, but who are the Galileans and what are they saying? So, everybody knows that Larry Summers, doesn't like deficits and is afraid to scare Wall Street. But what are the economic policies, not the people, but what are the substance of the economic policies that would make a difference?
Well, a lot of the Galileans are on the back of my book because they've endorsed my book, I'm happy to say. You know, people like Elizabeth Warren, who has written brilliantly about the tricks and traps, as she calls it, in our mortgage contracts, in our credit card contracts, and who has tirelessly worked to make possible the Consumer Protection Bureau that is going to become a reality, and who the Huffington Post is reporting tonight when you go home that is under consideration to be at least the interim head of the Bureau with a sort of imminent announcement. I mean, Simon Johnson that you mentioned, Joe Stiglitz, Nassim Taleb, who wrote the Black Swan,
Yeah.
you know, Nouriel Roubini, Paul Krugman. You know, there are a lot of Galilean economists. That's why I found it amazing. I have this section in the book about how people always say when they have gotten it wrong, their kind of way of justifying it is to say, who could have known? Who could have imagined? You know, who could have imagined that the levees would break? Remember with Katrina? The fact that many people had predicted it, that these levees would break, doesn't matter. And now we had Robert Gibbs 3 weeks ago saying, who could have known that unemployment would be so stubborn? Who could have known the stimulus would not have worked? Well, you know, a lot of people had said that. I actually personally wrote a blog when they announced the stimulus, quoting Lloyd George, the English Prime Minister, who said, you cannot jump across a chasm in 2 leaps. You know, you fall into the abyss. So don't give us an inadequate stimulus, because it's not going to work. And here is really the ultimate irony. Because it didn't work, you now have Republicans who can say, you see, the government spent all that money, it didn't work. It didn't work not because the government spent money, but because the government didn't spend enough money. But you see, they gave them this ammunition because they really should have known better. They should have known that we are dealing with a transformation of the American economy. We're not dealing with a cyclical problem. We're not dealing with what Larry Summers kept calling unemployment being a lagging indicator. I just asked our video editor today to just go and find every time all these wise pre-Galilean economists told us that unemployment is a lagging indicator. Because it's not. You know, we've lost our manufacturing base. A lot of these jobs are not coming back. And we need to be realistic about that. Because, you know, we are becoming a country that has stopped making things and is making things up.
Good. The question is, do we really need the Department of Homeland Security, or is it just another boondoggle and a waste?
We actually need the Department of Homeland Security much more than we need what we're doing in Afghanistan. Because we need, the truth is that terrorism is now in so many different centers. Terrorists can come from so many different centers, whether it's Yemen or a place here in America. So the idea that somehow you have to go hunt them down in the mountains of Afghanistan is another pre-Galilean idea. It's like, again, that's not what the modern kind of terrorism is. And, you know, our leaders talk about winning hearts and minds as a way to kind of manage to separate moderate Islam from those who are turning into jihadists. But in fact, this is not what our actions are doing. My own transformation? Yes. So my transformation, which happened in the sort of around 96, which had a lot to do with Al Franken, because he and I did something in 96 called Strange Bedfellows. I don't know if any of you watched it. It was Bill Maher's idea, and we basically did political commentary from bed. During Politically Incorrect, the days of Politically Incorrect, from the conventions. And it was a lot of fun, and I got a lot of fantastic lingerie, tax-free. But in the course of kind of doing all that, we kind of argued about everything. I was always a social moderate, on issues like abortion, gay rights, gun control, but I was very misguided about the role of government. I really thought that we could solve all our problems if we actually, as citizens, did our part. And then I realized that, in fact, we also needed the raw power of government appropriations, that, in fact, the problems were too big to be solved just with individual and community actions. But I also, as you've heard tonight, don't believe we can just solve them through government. I think we need both. So that was really, in a nutshell, my own political transformation.
If I'm interpreting correctly, you're saying that we as a country need to grow up. And what you just said about you don't think problems can be solved entirely through big government. Do you see anything coming from the government side that can kind of speed the process along of us growing up as a nation?
Well, there are some good things that have happened since Obama became president. I mean, the healthcare bill is very imperfect, but it takes some important steps. I think, again, if they had not underestimated the economic crisis, they would not have done that first, because they consumed an enormous amount of political capital. What they're doing on education is very important. I think the race to the top and their emphasis on real innovation, I think that's extremely important. There are good things happening. Here's my problem. My problem is that the solutions that they are offering are inadequate, and the solutions the Republicans are offering are laughable. So the American public is in a bit of a bind. In Nevada, they have another choice called none of the above. And this may be the salvation of Harry Reid, because people who can't bear to vote for Harry Reid, but they also can't bear to vote for Sherry Angle. I mean, how can you vote for her? Can now vote for none of the above. So if enough people vote for none of the above rather than Sherry Angle, Harry Reid wins. Well, in fact...
How to break the stranglehold
Yes.
of political money.
You're absolutely right. And in my section 5, which is how do we save ourselves from a third world future, the first solution, the first part is about what we can do at the national level. The second part is at the personal and community level. The first part, what I call the mother of all reforms, is addressing exactly your question, and it's about the absolute imperative need for public financing of campaigns. There is no other solution. Only when we have public financing of campaigns will we be able to break that stranglehold, because right now we have 26 lobbies for every elected official. I mean, what chance do the American people have? Long after we stopped paying attention to a bill, they're there, behind the scenes, undermining it. We are seeing it with the financial reform bill. The financial reform bill, by the time it's filled with loopholes, I don't know what good it's going to do. So that's an ongoing process, and that's ultimately the only solution. And Larry Lessing and the Fix Congress campaign is extremely important around that.
Arianna, may I ask you a last question?
Of course, you're in charge.
There are two disconnects that we haven't addressed. One is this tremendous loss of traction of the hopes around Barack Obama. And to me, there's a sort of parallel question about media. We've democratized media from the bottom up. Thousands of people can write for your wonderful blog, including me, and I'm privileged to be able to do it. But it's a privilege that all sorts of people can have. And in general, you can be your own broadcaster, as I am. You can be your own publisher, as she is, with a little wit and hard application. But we haven't changed the story. Glenn Beck, who we think is a lunatic, is telling the story that even the New York Times takes as its lead now. What's missing in both of these transformations? The change in the White House the promise of change in the White House that I think the country really wanted, and the transformation of bottom-up voices in place of the old media?
Well, I think part of it is that historically, and you're a student of history, you realize that fundamental reform that challenges the status quo always is harder and takes longer than we think, inevitably, without question. You know, my favorite story that I have in the book is Martin Luther King meeting with Lyndon Johnson in March '65 and asking for the Voting Rights Act. And Lyndon Johnson saying, we don't have the votes, which is what they always say. And then came the Selma March, and a few months later we had the Voting Rights Act. So citizens have to just continue working hard to make real transformative change happen. And we saw that it's not enough to just elect somebody like Barack Obama. The movement has to continue building and demanding change. And it's almost like, you know, politicians put their, even the best ones, put their finger and see which way the wind is blowing. So we have to change the way the wind is blowing. And you asked one other thing about the media. So
Well, yeah, I'm still a big believer in transformation of media by opening up the conversation.
yes.
And yet it seems in a certain way to be stuck. Maybe one way to ask it, I was thinking about, to ask you, what is the difference now and in the future, but even now, between, you know, this is your nation on the Huffington Post, and this is your nation on the old mainstream media? And
Okay, I can tell you.
what's
immediately.
changed, and what
Well,
bigger change can we hope for?
first of all, there is a lot of bigger change coming. Secondly, I think the key difference is that if mainstream media suffer from ADD, you know, attention deficit disorder, you know, they break a lot of important stories and then they move on. And that means that we don't have enough time to process it all and bring about real change. You know, it doesn't have enough time to have real impact. Online media suffer from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Like, we take a story and we stay on it, and we stay on it, and we stay. I mean, like, look at, if you go on the Huffington Post now, you will just not be able to escape third world America. Stories of success, stories of struggle. It takes time to build, and we recognize that on any story that we cover. When we covered the mining disaster, we stayed on the story, and even after you could no longer read anything about that story in the mainstream media because they were done with it. You know, it's like, we did that. We stayed on the story. I mean, like, BP has practically disappeared from the mainstream media, but we're staying on the story about what's happening. So that is really the hope. We can't just lose interest and just move on to the next big story. And that is ultimately going to be the way you can build the kind of media that can have the impact that we want and bring about real change.
Who's our model in fighting third worldismo?
Well, first of all, let me just say that as an immigrant to this country, there is no other country I would rather live in. I mean, this is an amazing country. And so I don't think there is any particular model that we can just import. I think we need to reinvent what we are doing. And we need to come together in different ways all across the country. And there are so many different ways people are doing it. That is what is so exciting. I mean, from things that are happening online, go and check out a site like howigotlaid.off.com or recessionwire.com or Project Bounce Back or we have time to help.org. You know, it's just you are going to leave inspired, even though you're going to be saddened by the stories of loss of jobs and loss of homes. The fact that people don't give up is so inspiring. And the fact that people on the political level continue to work for real change despite the disappointments. I mean, that's how change happens. And so I don't think there is something that we can import. We just have to create it our own way, both at the political level, the national level, and at the community level.
Arianna Huffington, thank you, and thanks to a wonderful audience too.